Hey guys, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Poker. One of the most challenging things about getting good at this game is that the content that you're ingesting is usually random. The spots that come up when you're watching a coach play live or go over hand histories are not usually systematically chosen. They vary a lot, not just in their subject matter, but in their difficulty and complexity as well. Imagine not being able to choose your curriculum when you're learning a topic, especially one as complicated as poker. We're going to fix that today. We're going to systematically make our way through one topic at a time in a poker trainer, making sure that we know exactly what factors matter and which ones don't. By the time you finish the series, you're going to have an absolutely solid fundamental base on which to build the rest of your poker education. If you enjoy this video and find it helpful, then why not head over to carrotcorner.com to check out our other poker courses. Now let's get started with check raising some flops. Let's learn poker the right way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new series here at Carrot Corner. This is going to make some of the most common spots, some of the most important spots for your win rate a bit more understandable to you. I'm going to pitch this so that it's comprehensible to beginners, so that it's easy for you to follow, but so that more advanced players can also get a little bit out of this series as well. The reason I decided to look at check raising in this first episode of the series is that I think it's a really common spot. Spots in poker can be important to your win rate, either because they result in large pots where you have to make big decisions for lots of chips, or because of their frequency, you know, how often they reoccur. This spot occurs very often where we're just in the big blind, we call, we face a c-bet. C-betting is a good thing to do. The pre-flop raiser can do it frequently. They have a range advantage. They're going to be betting quite often in position. That's fine, but we need to know how to handle that. So the first thing we're going to look at today is check raising. And the first thing I want to distill for you here is that there are two and only two primary motivations for you to check raise the flop. Your hand can either be a value candidate or it can be a bluff candidate. What do I mean by the term candidate hand? Well, a bluff candidate, such as this one, if it did raise, it would be for the reason of bluff, is a hand that basically lacks the showdown value to ever be raising for value, and it might be able to call. If it did call, it would be bluffing at some point, probably later down the road. So a bluff candidate is a hand that could raise the flop or could consider raising the flop, and if it did, it would be to gain fold equity, not to try to get value. The other type of candidate raised on the flop is a value candidate, which clearly this hand is not. So when we say candidate, what we're really saying is this hand closer to value or closer to a bluff? Sometimes the hand is bang in the middle. We don't really raise with those hands. There are some exceptions, but usually we don't. Those would be polarization mistakes to raise. In other words, we need a more polarized hand. We need a hand that's worse than medium or better than medium to consider raising. In other words, we need a bluff candidate or a value candidate to consider raising. So the first and most important thing that you should do when you're starting out in your poker career and you're deciding whether you want to raise a continuation bet is answer the question, do I have either a bluff candidate or a value candidate? If the answer is no, because you have a hand like 10-7 here, then you just have to call. There are no two ways about it. We don't turn 10-7 into a bluff in this spot. So what is ace-7? It's a bluff candidate. That doesn't mean that it can raise. Can ace-7 offsuit raise in this spot? Yes or no? Pause the video, have a think about it. What do you think? So the answer is no, and let me explain why. So first off, this is what we would call a hostile environment for our range. If we have a look at our range versus range equity here, we can see it's only 43.51%. That means that Villain's range is entitled to 57% of this pot if the cards were flipped over and you just ran it all the way to Showdown. Obviously, real life is a bit more complicated than that. You have to think about positional advantage, nut advantage, some other range versus range concepts. But the out of position player here is going to be struggling because they're out of position. They're actually going to do worse than this equity suggests. So a very bad hostile climate for our range here, and that means that we're going to have to be somewhat picky about which bluff candidates we use. This introduces the concept of the minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is how much equity, prospects, redraws you're going to need to bluff raise the flop. And in a world like this, you need a lot more going on than a7. So we're going to fold this one. The trainer tells us that fold is okay, and it gives us a few results down here. Fold has 100% frequency. It's a pure action, and it is the play with the highest EV. The EV of fold, just down below the frequency, is 0, because while we're putting no additional money into the pot, we're not losing anything extra from this point of view. We're also not winning anything either, so the EV of folding is nothing. Calling would give us an EV of minus 2.96 chips. This is a 5-10 game. Villain has opened to 25 chips before the flop. We have called. They've gone ahead and c-bet a third of the pot. And if we call that c-bet with a7, you might be tempted to think, well, I have ace high, I have a bit of showdown value. You lose money. You lose a third of a big blind on average, because the idea is that the hand just doesn't have enough going for it. You don't realize enough of your equity. You don't get to showdown in one piece often enough. And you can sometimes turn an ace and still lose, or turn a 7 and still lose, so your outs are not very robust either. Raise has an even worse EV. If you decided to turn this hand into a bluff, it's such a hopeless hand. Its blocker properties are bad, but I'm not going to go into that too much today. You actually have an EV of minus 6.54 chips. This is really terrible. This is almost a big blind. It's almost a fifth of the pot. It's a very large amount of money to lose by making such a common mistake. So because of the minimum threshold, because of the fact that your range is in a bad spot, you need to be more careful here. So because of the minimum standard that we have to adhere to when we're selecting our bluffs, a7 is not going to cut it, and we have to fold. What could we raise here? What if we had a hand like Jack 9? Let's say we had Jack 9 of clubs. Would we be able to raise that hand? Is that above our minimum standard? Pause the video, have a think about it. The answer is yes. If we have a hand like the Jack 9 of clubs, things are looking much better. Actually, that's not a hand we have pre-flop here in this particular sim, because it's actually 3-betting all the time, so it's absent. But we can take a hand like Queen 9 of clubs and look at that. So if we have Queen 9 of clubs, what we see on this screen is that the solver is choosing the salmon pink raise color here. It's raising 4 times the bet. That's the sizing we provided for it. And furthermore, it's saying that with this straight draw, backdoor flush draw, you actually have to raise in order to not lose EV. So what we've found here is a pure raise. Yes, the hand is an underdog, it's not doing amazingly, but combined with the fold equity you're going to get by raising Queen 9, you should always take that action. At this point, you might want to pause the video and have a look at this strategy. What other hands do you see that you're allowed to bluff raise with here? Can you locate the middle of your range that's never going to be raising at all because it's too mediocre? And can you then locate some value raises? Well, some examples of other bluff raises are going to be some speculative stuff like 7-6 with the back door. You're allowed to raise that. Other gut shots, mainly, things of that nature. There are some weird anomalies here that I'm not going to focus on too much today, like raising with bottom pair. This is a bit more of an advanced concept I'm going to leave off the table, but by and large, our mediocre hands are just going to be playing as calls. These are the middle of our range. I sometimes call this the median. They're just hands that you don't really want to raise with because calling is better. You have showdown value. You don't want to turn the hand into a bluff. It's not strong enough to raise for value. They're not candidates for raising, either as bluffs or as value bets. When we have a hand like King 7, King 8, King 9, we start doing a lot of raise. By the time we're up to King Jack, we're doing a ton of raise. As you can see, this is a situation where we can value raise pretty aggressively, but we need a decent top pair really to start doing that. We're not going to be doing that for the most part with second pair or an under pair or anything like that. So we have a polarized range. A good way to display this is to look at the EV for the out of position player, like so, and you can see that some of our raises here, like Queen 9, are very orangey in color. They're not doing very well. Our green hands like King Jack, these are raising, and all of the hands that appear kind of yellowy to light orange, these are the ones that are just going to be played as call. So when we have a hand like Jack 10, it's yellowy, it's middling, it's just going to be played as call. There's really no reason to raise it. And then when we get to the really terrible hands like the ace 7 that we just looked at there, we're going to be folding. The best we can do is 0 EV because the hand is awful and it does not pass the bar when it comes to the minimum standard for selecting our bluffs. In this next situation, we have the King of Clubs, 9 of Diamonds on a rather horrendous flop for our range. If we look at the equity range versus range here, again, we can see that we're doing rather badly with an equity of only 43.37%. This means, again, that we're going to have to fold a lot. We're going to have to be pretty selective with our raises. And the question is, what kind of hand is this? Is this a bluff candidate? Is it a value candidate? Or is it neither? The answer is, of course, that this hand is neither. It's actually not low enough down to even really be considered a candidate for bluff bluffing, nor is it anywhere near good enough to value bet. So again, imagine your range here. Imagine it having a middle part that just calls. Imagine your hands like 6-7, pocket 8s, king queen, king jack, king 10. These are hands that are going to call. Then you can imagine some of your bluff raises. What would they be? They might be like backdoor straight draws, maybe like 8-7 of hearts, something like that. Something that gives you a bit of hope, a bit of optimism, something that gives you multiple options later on in the hand, something that can even win a big pot one day with the right run out. There is again a very harsh minimum standard for what you're allowed to bluff here, but there's also this polarization standard. King 9 immediately should strike us as quite a mediocre hand. Its call EV is going to be way better than its raise EV. This hand is going to be callable here because the board is so bone dry and so hard to hit, but that's not really what we're teaching in this video. So while call is a 100% line and it's entitled to just over a 20th of a big blind and EV 0.63 chips, it wouldn't be a disaster if you were to fold this hand. What would be slightly more of a disaster would be if you decided to turn this hand into a bluff raise. That's wrong for two reasons. One, the hand is a bit too mediocre and call is much better. And two, it doesn't really pass the minimum standard in terms of improvability. Again, looking at hands that you are allowed to bluff raise here, you're going to be using things like I mentioned, like the 8-7, like the 9-8, these multiple backdoor hands. Even something like Queen 8 that just has live pair draws and backdoor flush draw is going to be okay. When the pair draws become sufficiently bad, like Queen 5 backdoor, Queen 4 backdoor, Queen 3 backdoor, we stop raising. Hitting the 3 doesn't give you the best hand as often as hitting the 8 does. Don't forget about pair draws, guys. They're a form of equity, they're a form of semi-bluffing. Queen 8 and Queen 3, definitely not the same hand in this spot, very different EVs. Can you spot the median of our range? Can you spot the region that just wants to continue by calling? That's right, it's things like 4s, 5s, king high, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, things like this. 7s is getting kind of weird and going for some very thin value, and I'm going to get into topics like this in future episodes. You can also find out a lot more about concepts like hybrid raising, that's raising pocket 7s here, by looking at the Carrot Poker School, watching that on carrotcorner.com. That is, of course, our theoretical Bible, our roadmap to the whole landscape of no limit hold'em cash games. We can then look at where some other bluffs are coming from. We have things like King 4 with some backdoor straight draws, stuff like this. Queen 10 with better pair draws with overcards to the 6 or overcards to pocket 9s and things like that. And then our value region begins at moderately decent ace-6. So with ace 7 and better, we begin value raising, even some ace 4 raises as well. So as we can see, there really is a distinct polarized layout to our flop raising range. There is a minimum standard for bluffing and there's a minimum standard for value betting. Knowing where these are very important thresholds for your poker understanding. Another threshold you want to pay attention to is where does my hand have too much showdown value to start raising? And as we saw, hands like King 9, King 10 were a little bit too good, but you can bluff raise here with some backdoor straight draw suited kings like King 7 or King 5. Okay, so we have ace 7 on King Queen 6 here. Again, we face this range bet. Another board that's pretty bad for us, but not quite as bad as the ace 6 board. This one being two-tone is going to help a little bit. We do have some low suited cards in our range, but get a little bit of a boost on a high two-tone board like this by having flush draws. But still, this is not an advantageous spot for our range and there's going to be harsh standards. The reason I keep bringing this up is that we're going to look at some other spots later in the series, for example, barreling the turn in position, and there are some situations when you're doing stuff like that where the world is actually really good for your range and you can bet with almost any hand at all as a bluff as long as it lacks showdown value. That's not the case when it comes to raising flop c-bets out of position. Usually you're in a hostile climate. So with ace 7 here, what do you guys think? Pause the video. Does this reach our minimum standard for bluffing? Is it low enough down to bluff, or is this in the median of our range and we have to call it? Is this hand just too hopeless and has to be a fold? What do you think? So my first thoughts when I saw this hand were that it's really quite close to a call. Like, I think this hand has a little showdown value, it has some stuff going for it, it doesn't seem like a horrific call. When it comes to raising on wetter boards, we're going to have a bit of a fussier standard about having immediate draws. So on the last board we looked at, which was ace 6-6, which was ace 6, it was kind of impossible to have a draw. So having a pair draw was as good as we could do. We couldn't have a straight draw or a flush draw. But here's the thing, on boards boards with 2 high cards or even 3 high cards, where there are flush draws and straight draws present, naked pair draws are going to be pretty terrible. So while a7 is a really cool hand on a board like 5-5 deuce, it's a huge hand on 5-5 deuce where you have a backdoor. Well, it's a decent hand, maybe huge is getting a little bit carried away. On this board, it's actually quite terrible, because on a board that's more connected and high and wet and easy to hit, you definitely need to have more immediate straight draws when you're raising. So on wetter textures, what we're learning here is that the minimum standard for bluffing is going to go up. We're going to favor immediacy with our draws. That means being able to hit the turn right away and make our hand, rather than needing to backdoor something. And also look at the caliber of our pair draw in this situation. Hitting the ace here is really far from great. You're going to be dominated still, unfortunately, by some bigger ace-x, by some 2-pair, by some straights. Jack 10, of course, getting there on the ace turn and being a hand that they have relatively frequently. So this is a situation where the hand looks a bit better than it is. I'm really torn here between calling and folding. I'd probably just fold this most of the time. I wouldn't be shocked if call was okay. And yeah, it's actually fine to call and it's okay to fold. And it's actually creeping in there with a bluff raise. Like, raising this hand is not diabolical. You could kind of get away with it. The solver's never doing it, but if you look at the EV of raise here, it's not really a mistake. I don't think I would ever raise this hand, but it's actually not horrendous if you do. So this hand is borderline. We can say it's right on the threshold. When we're looking at hands on this texture that are much clearer raises, we're going to be concerning ourselves with, again, immediacy, things that have the immediate outs. 10-9, Jack-9, Jack-10, these are good. You can sort of turn the 6 into a bit more of an advanced hybrid bluff raise. For any of you that know what hybrids are, that have taken the Carrot Poker School, that'll make a lot of sense to you. If not, carrotcorner.com, check it out. There's a lot more detail on this topic in grade 2 of the Carrot Poker School. Lecture 9 or 10, I can't quite remember which one, but one of those, I always forget the order. But yeah, our bluffs here are just going to have to be more immediate. They're generally gut shots for the most part. Our value region, again, you can locate where that starts. It's good king X and better. This is typically the case in late position. If we were against under the gun here instead of button, it would actually have to be a bit stricter which top pair we raise. And once again, guys, there's a very clear median of our range region that is just calling. Flop raising strategies are always polarized. We don't turn second pair or third pair or anything like that into a raise usually, although there are a few exceptions. And yeah, we have to be kind of careful. Look at the hands that are folding here. Ace-7 without the ace of hearts. Ace-8 without the ace of hearts. We don't care about that kind of showdown value because it's just not going to turn into anything often enough. We're not going to get to realize it. Because the board is wet, we have to be way fussier about what we raise with. So hands that were raises previously are going to struggle to return the same EV here. Look at 5-3 of spades. We saw previously that hands with multiple backdoors on the really dry ace-6 board were able to raise. That was because their pair outs were of a higher caliber. Here, hitting a pair of 3s or 5s is pretty awful, and so this measly backdoor is just not going to cut the mustard when it comes to selecting bluff raises. In this situation, we face a c-bet on ace-9-4. Again, not a good board for a range. These are all fairly bad boards we're looking at today because I chose flops intentionally where the opponent is betting all of their range in theory or close to that. So with 9-8 here, this is a real confusing situation for absolute beginners because you just feel like your hand is very medium. But when you get a bit more advanced, you learn what that means. Well, what it means is that if you raise, it's unclear what kind of candidate your hand is. Is it really a value candidate to raise 9-8? Is it a bluff candidate to raise 9-8? Not really. So again, we can disqualify this from the raise process and just view it as a call or a fold. Which of those is right? Well, clearly we're ahead of most of villain's range here. They have a lot of unpaired cards. We have 5 outs to improve and win a big pot when we are behind. This is a very clear call. Raising would cost you a couple of chips or a fifth of a big blind. Folding would cost you a whole big blind. If you ever folded here because you were uncomfortable and you wanted top pair instead, of course you'd be making a horrible mistake. But I think all of us know that. Even if we're quite new to the game, you're probably familiar with that concept. Ace-10 in this spot, I'll speed this up now and just go through a few more examples. What kind of candidate would this be? Yeah, it's kind of unclear, right? Like the hand has a lot of showdown value. Would this be a bluff candidate? Like really? I mean, I can't see many stronger hands that villain is folding. A good litmus test for whether your hand can be a bluff candidate is usually to ask, will my opponent fold many better hands than mine right now if I raise? I think even combos like ace king here are pretty much pure continues against the raise. Maybe they're mixing depending on sizing, but it's unclear that too many better hands are folding. I don't think a pair of 5s or 7s or anything like that is ever going to fold to a raise. So even with the ace of diamonds, even though that does tempt us towards raising a bit, my primary option here is call. The hand is of course far too good to fold. It loses a tiny bit of EV if you raise with it. If you look at the numbers there, loses a whole big blind if you fold. Again, this is a spot where you have to be careful that you don't eat into your showdown value too much when you're selecting your bluff raises. Just generating spots freely now, not preparing them or anything. Now we have Jack 8-8, we have the gut shot. What kind of candidate is this, and can we do it? Pause the video, give me an answer. The correct answer is of course that this is a bluff candidate and we can raise it, absolutely. We'll do quite a bit of raising in this spot, and that's because the 8 is actually providing us with quite a lot of nutrition in the domain of value hands. It's feeding our range all of these juicy value-y hands, and that's going to increase our bluff frequency a little bit as well. So definitely with a gut shot, even without a backdoor, you're going to be doing some raising. Raise or call is totally fine here. You may have noticed this little number at the bottom left, which is the RNG. When you think that either calling or raising is absolutely fine, as I do here, one way you can make a decision if you don't want to overthink it and you don't have an exploitative read to act on is to go for a mix and actually say, well, half the time when it's a high number I'm going to call, and half the time when it's a lower number I'm going to raise, or something like that. I'm going to actually call here, but yeah, call and raise are both fine. It's doing more raise than call. That's because, as I say, there are a lot of value hands in our range here that want to raise, so we do quite a lot of raising with gut shots. If we fold, again, look at the numbers, look at the EV, we'd be losing 10 chips. That's a whole big blind. That would be very, very bad. Okay, let's do a couple more before we wrap up this introductory episode of the series. Pocket 4s on Queen 9-5. What kind of candidate would this be? Would it be one at all? Would it be a value candidate? Would it be a bluff candidate? The answer is neither. This hand is just too mediocre to poor. It's kind of bad. It's definitely on the cusp of fold. But here's the thing. In really wide range spots where people are betting all of their range, you've got to be pretty careful that you don't fold too much showdown value. So even though I feel miserable about this hand, I'm not enjoying my prospects here, and I know that calling is going to usually lead to me losing this pot anyway. We have to understand that when we're facing c-bets, we're getting 3-1. That means that we only have to win one time in 4. And let's not forget, this isn't just winning or losing the pot, but it also factors in EV. So the fact that we're out of position, that's going to suck here. Like, if you look at our hand equity here, I have no idea what it is. Wow, 41. That's a lot higher than I actually thought. I guess it makes sense since Villain is betting with everything here. We have enough equity that calling looks like a no-brainer. Then why are we so upset about it? Why is it actually quite close? The reason that it's not so good in EV terms to call here is that, well, we're out of position. We're going to face another bet quite often. Our hand rarely improves, and Villain's range does actually get to apply a lot of pressure here and just win the pot by making us fold pretty frequently. So this hand out of position is going to underperform. It's still a call, I think, but it's getting close to a fold now, and I wouldn't be shocked if folding didn't lose much EV. So we do call. We can see that raising would be a slight mistake, and so would fold. So you'd lose about 1/3 to 40% of a big blind if you take either of those plays. The hand is not a raise because it's too mediocre, but it's also not a raise because it doesn't really meet the minimum standard of improvability and being able to win big pots later anyway. It's just basically a dead showdown value hand that's begging and scraping its way to showdown, so we call with it. If this was against earlier position, we would just fold right away. We wouldn't even be calling this c-bet with the 2 4s. This will be our final hand for today, and there's a couple of points I want to make on this one. The first is that we do have this thing called a 3-way threshold, where basically fold, call, and raise all have very similar EV. This hand here, the ace-deuce of hearts and the king 10-4, is one such hand. Calling is alright, but nothing special. It's slightly plus EV. Raising is also alright, but nothing special. We shouldn't do it all of the time if we want to play a balanced strategy, but it is okay sometimes to turn this hand into a bluff. And folding is not a disaster either because all of the investment options are close to 0. I'm going to just raise this time. But if we look here at the EV, we can see that all EVs are practically the same. It's slightly better to get involved here than it is to fold, but there could be some hands that are literally just totally indifferent, and learning where those thresholds are is key to mastering how to play your range in these spots. The second and final point I want to make today is that there are certain hands that are just really, really strong that you actually have to raise all of the time for value. The case in point here is pocket fours. If we have a look at how that plays in the solver, we can see that it is actually an EV mistake not to raise the pocket fours here, and that's because it's just getting quite urgent to build this pot immediately. Another hand that exhibits this pattern is King 10, which is also being played as effectively a pure raise, but this one isn't as big a deal. You could slow play this without as much of an EV loss. It's really important to understand that what we've looked at today is theoretical. It's been about building the fundamentals. If you're playing against particularly stationary passive players, it's even more important that you raise your sets. It's important that you don't raise the bluffs that are at the bottom of your range that are just okay to raise in theory. Similarly, if you're playing against nitty players who are too tight, you want to bluff all the time. You want to just always raise these hands that are on the threshold, as long as you don't think there are going to be many repercussions when your opponents catch on to your strategy. So this is the theoretical side of check raising. I hope it's made a lot of sense to you. I hope it's clarified some matters. Next time we're going to get into turn barreling. We're going to find out how to handle betting the turn in position after a flop c-bet gets called. Another really common, important spot. Don't forget to smash that like button if you like this content, and why not check out carrotcorner.com for more poker education. I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye for now.